Welcome back to Recruiting Blitz. My name's Tim Verghese. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Before we get started, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel. We're joined today by, I guess we can say Rivals host now. Rivals host Josh Newberg. Josh, welcome to the show. On Three and Rivals officially merged. We're all together. We're all friends. I guess we'll start off here. For the fans that don't know who you are, who are just kind of tuned into this thing, who've been subscribed to Rivals and just figuring all this out. What do you do? What can fans expect out of you? And yeah, kind of how excited are you about this merger?
I think it's awesome. Happy to be a part of the Rivals network at this point. I worked at scout.com for 4 or 5 years, and then Shannon Terry hired me at 24/7 Sports in 2010. I worked for at 24/7 for 12 years. He brought me on here at On Three. I've been here for 3 years, and now I'm at Rivals apparently. So it's come full circle. So that's pretty cool. I get to say that I've worked at them all. I host the well, I almost called it the On Three Recruits channel. It is now the Rivals Recruits channel, and I'm the host on that. And we have a couple shows. We have the Inside Scoop, which is kind of like my show. That's kind of like the sports center of the channel. It's where you get your news. Then we have the Wilfong Whip Around. That's Steve weighing in on everything. Simmons Scoop with Chad Simmons. So we have a lot of different things, also live commitments, and are we in the thick of it for commitment season. I think we got one every day this week, if not two. So we stay busy over here, but yeah, kind of just bringing on the talent from the network and talking about the biggest developments in recruiting.
Right. And so we've got two big ones. Obviously, over the last day or so, Nebraska landed four-star offensive tackle Claude Impuma, beating out Auburn, beating out Florida for him. And Nebraska's tried over the last few years to land that, blue chip tackle. They tried with Brandon Baker a few cycles ago. They made a late push for David Sanders last year. And, if they win a couple more games in the season, maybe they're able to get a second chance at Sanders. And Puma's not as highly ranked as Baker or Sanders was by the end of it. But I mean, looking at the physical features, looking at the tape, and relative to experience, I mean, there's a very good chance that Puma ends up as a top 100 prospect, or like in that for sure blue chips type status. Um, Kind of what is it? What do you think this means for Nebraska? You kind of put a bow on this offensive line class with Puma, and Leon Noyle as well, who also committed on Monday. You have three offensive tackles in the class now with some versatility in Noyle, in Puma, Hayden Ainsworth, plus you add Rex Waterman, the interior lineman, to the class. They missed out on Ryan Moret, but you put together a group of four offensive linemen. I guess, do you see this happening in other places, just this investment in offensive line to this extent year in and year out?
I mean, you got to stack them, but Nebraska stacks them with some size on them, 6'5", 6'6", 295, 300 across the board. Then you add in Puma, who's 6'8", 260. So you got to love that. He's an athletic, if college coaches had it their way, they'd rather have a guy be 6'8", 260, come in and put the 20 pounds on rather than have somebody 6'8", 320, where you got to take the 20 pounds off and then put it, so he comes in as a big athletic body. I love that. You got to love just the fact that they got a bunch of people movers, and it's still early, man. Like, I know it feels like, because kids are coming off the board left and right now, that we're like nearing the end of this cycle, but really we're really just at the middle of this cycle. So I love what Nebraska's building on the offensive line. Love the size, love the athleticism, and I think I don't think they're done yet.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the again where we're at in the cycle. I've talked a lot this month about how important, I guess, we're now in this quote unquote second recruitment period. Nebraska just kind of went through that with CJ Bronaugh, where they won the first recruitment. They landed his commitment back in October.
Mhm.
His process is a little accelerated. He takes his OVs in June. His second recruitment ends with a flip to Florida. You have Devin Jackson, who Nebraska's in the thick of it for, who his first recruitment, he was committed to Florida. And now he's aiming to make a final decision here on July 3rd, deciding between Florida, Nebraska, Oregon, LSU, Miami. Oregon's the one that's trending. Nebraska, but the decision's not been made yet. He's still working. And so, like you mentioned, I mean, Nebraska's Danny Odom committed. We don't think that recruitment's done. I'm assuming you don't think that recruitment's done either. That's one where I expect Ohio State and Clemson and Oklahoma to kind of work this thing till the end. So, Is this different? You've been around for a long time. Does this feel different where these guys are kind of schools and recruits alike are kind of trying to make this decision in the summer, but then allowing this to kind of play out a little further, even when they publicly claim to be shut down?
Yeah, you had the early, you're right. This kind of the second season, but there's going to be a third season because
Yeah.
when the games get played this season, that's going to be another data point session for some of these recruits to make decisions, to decommit, to flip, whatever. But right now, we are definitely in the middle of the second recruiting cycle of this cycle because you can feel the pressure some of these recruits are getting. You're seeing your peers come off the board at a high clip, and you're like, well, I know where I'm pretty sure I know where I want to go, so I might as well get my spot too. Because let's be honest, I mean, there's only a handful of guys that can punch their ticket to any school in the country at any time. Nebraska will offer a lot of recruits early. Would they take them? Yes. But doesn't mean that they would take them all cycle because you only have 20, 25 spots to give. You start filling up. Well, we got this guy. So no longer is this guy, we don't need him anymore. So he's off our board. So recruits get that sense and they're like, well, shoot, I better find my spot. And you see this avalanche of commitments happen. Some of these kids are ready. Some of them are not ready. They're just putting a foot in the door to hold it open. So we'll see another season of this. And that's why it's really important for Nebraska to win some football games because if they win some football games, they're going to be able to circle the block and come around on some of these guys that did not pick their school the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple guys that just straight up told me they were like, like the one thing missing from Nebraska was just the results on the field, and Nebraska has everything else. I mean, we saw that at the Battle of the Boneyard, the way kids were talking about Nebraska coming out of that tournament, the number of 27 guys that they've gotten on campus so far, the way they talk about campus. But I noted you mentioned the numbers crunch a little bit, and some schools are working up against it, others aren't. You have a school like USC who's aiming to take like 30 plus commits this cycle. You have
Mm-hmm.
schools that are going to take 25 plus. And people look at Nebraska's class and, there's some cause for concern within the fan base just out of the numbers, but they're operating off of within a numbers crunch themselves because of this 105 roster man limit, because of this grandfather clause, because of everything. They are kind of limited to kind of capped at 20 kind of max additions this cycle. Um, I guess as you're kind of seeing two different schools of thoughts at the Power Four level between the numbers crunch and NIL right now. Are you seeing that on your end as well from a national perspective of, some schools are still operating like rev share isn't here yet, and other schools are operating like, okay, we're operating within these kind of not salary caps, but I guess salary caps is the best way to put it. The salary caps of a rev share limit where, okay, we're not going to pay over this much for a certain position, no matter who the player is, or we're not going to overspend here because we can spend here. And you have other schools that are still front loading NIL contracts, and still doing those kind of things. How do you balance that, and how do you kind of like talk to the average fan that is completely lost about all of this and explain that to them and kind of lower the panic level, I guess, about numbers and everything.
I think the rev share can bring things back to relationships and to recruiting because if the money's equal, then it's going to come down to what it used to come down to relationships, playing time, location, facilities. Like the old factors in recruiting are going to come up if money's equal. And I think money is equal for a lot of these prospects, except for maybe the top 50, top 75, top 100, maybe, getting into the 100, where you have like tiers of schools that I see. And I can tell when it comes to like a top 25 recruit, it's Ohio State, it's Texas, it's Georgia, it's USC, Oregon. Like those are you see the usual suspects around the majority of the top 50 recruits. So that tells me that yeah, sure, rev share is a thing, but if you're really going to compete for top talent, you got to get that NIL collective together to supplement, the above and beyond the red share, because that's just going to happen for those prospects. We're seeing it, which is also why I was so surprised that Nebraska didn't have anything going on with Jackson Cantwell. I thought for sure last year at this time, Jackson Cantwell would be having Nebraska in his final group. Like it just seemed like there was a relationship there. But when his recruitment got to when the rubber met the road, it was the usual suspects again. It was Ohio State, it was Georgia, it was Miami, you know. So that kind of showed me like, oh, there is another tier to this. And there's certain program and like again, I'm not talking if your team loses, you know, a four-star recruit to another team doesn't mean that they paid above and beyond. I'm talking the top 25, 50 recruits in the country. I think there's just another level of a business taking place there.
So when you're a school that's, one of those, not one of those, kind of familiar suspects, to win those type of recruitments, do you kind of have to spot recruit that now? Do you kind of have to pick and choose your battles essentially? Like, obviously, like you used to, but is that kind of how it is like for Nebraska, for example? Is it a thing of as we get closer to the season, if they want to circle back on one of those top 25 guys, it's like you have to go all in on Jackson Campbell, or you have to go all in on one of those guys you think you have a good relationship with?
Yeah, and that might not be the way that they want to build the program. I mean, you know, one man doesn't make the roster. So if
Right.
you're gonna do that, maybe you do that at key positions. Maybe you break the bank at quarterback. Maybe you do it at offensive tackle. But like a program that's working through rev share and on a budget isn't going to do that for a linebacker or, you know, a player that's not an instant impact franchise type player. Now, will they get into some of those battles? And then also, like, do you have a personal connection? Is there a family member that was a legacy? Is there, you know, there's other angles you can take, and then you can pick your battles there.
Right. And so with Nebraska, for example, I mean, obviously Dylan was one where it was the legacy and everything kind of combined. Last cycle you saw, they were able to kind of flip Cortez Mills late and
Mm,
that was just again a relationship, a long-standing relationship. Isaiah Mosey, just having his father on the staff. When you look at
yep.
this cycle and you look at, as we get into the fall, you talk about some of these third recruitments. Cantwell's a name that comes up. Is he a guy you could see potentially exploring some other options? I know Nebraska's kind of sniffing around. We talked about it last week. Nebraska's still sniffing around fellow Miami commit Jordan Campbell, been trying to flip him away. He's publicly announced multiple times at this point that his recruitment is shut down. We don't think that's going to ultimately be the case. I think he's going to make some visits in the fall. Do you see something like that potentially happening with Cantwell, or do you think
I
he's
think
stuck, he's locked in?
you would need a catalyst to move Cantwell off of that commitment.
Right.
Whether and what I'm the, you know, something that is going to, you know, Miami had to come with a huge NIL package to land him because of who they were competing with. Cantwell wasn't necessarily a Miami guy until he started taking visits just recently. You know, there were schools that he visited a lot, like Georgia. He visited Georgia a lot more than he visited Miami early on, but Miami had to do something in that recruitment to win him over. And a huge NIL package is one of the things. I mean, obviously, Mario Cristobal and what the staff does in Miami with offensive linemen, Mario being a former offensive lineman himself, there was a lot there to that as well. But I would think it would take something, you know, for Nebraska to maybe make the biggest NIL offer they've ever made, because we got to assume they were in the game for Brandon Baker. They were in the game for David Sanders. Obviously, it wasn't at the top of the game. Otherwise, they would have landed him. So you've got to imagine if they want to get back in the game with Jackson Campbell, and I'm not saying they should, because I don't know if that, you know, is financially feasible, and then also sign a solid class around him. But I think it would have to be something pretty spectacular to get him off that. Now, maybe it's, you know, Nebraska going undefeated this season. Like, would that do it? You know, there's other ways to get his attention, but I think it would have to be something pretty big.
Right. And he's a guy that, like he does have some ties to the program and the area, but it is one that Nebraska had their backup options set up as soon as, kind of things looked like it wasn't going their way anymore.
Mm-mm.
Had prioritized Kelvin Obot, prioritized Claude Impuma, like we mentioned, who they've landed. So,
Yeah,
and
and
like you
I don't
said,
think like
yeah.
I think not to say they got burned by David Sanders or Brandon Baker, but they were a lot further down the road with those guys than they were Jackson Cantwell. Like I don't, you know, Cantwell's recruitment with Nebraska, while he did take those early visits and I did think that they were going to be a factor, it never really got off the ground.
Right. Like the final cut
In
down or like
crunch
the
time.
top seven. Yeah, they didn't even make like the top seven or so for
Right.
him. I think there was like that final cut down that happened for him. Nebraska wasn't included. So they knew kind of well, 6 months ago they weren't in that
Right.
anymore.
For sure.
And they've yeah, like you mentioned, maybe they don't go back on Cantwell because they've built, they have 4 O-line commits now.
Mhm.
They are in a position where, they can kind of move things around a little bit. And they are kind of loading up for this 27 cycle with Trey Taylor kind of leading the way. So I
That's where you
wanted to
want to
get to that.
start it.
Yeah, before we get out of here, um, when you talk about Nebraska, obviously cap limitations here, or just roster limitations in 26, but they're aiming high in 27. They've already had Kennedy Brown on campus. They've already had Jake Hildebrand on campus. They're in it for Ahmad Hudson. They've got Nick Lanier on campus. They're in it for a bunch of guys. They've had Noah Roberts on campus quietly a couple times already, and so they're in it for a bunch of guys. Do you get the same sentiment? Because I say it a lot around here, and people, take it because I'm a local guy, and I'm just saying things sometimes. Do you get the sentiment that Nebraska starts winning some games, guys are going to start coming to Nebraska?
Yeah, I do get that sentiment. I mean, it's easier said than done.
For
We
sure.
saw them make a ball game this year, so that's definitely a step in the right direction. There's definitely more excitement, but as much excitement as there was in year one of Matt Rule, like every year that goes on further, it kind of dies down without winning. So yes, the bowl game was big, but the excitement heading into this season probably isn't the same as the excitement heading into his first season. You know what I mean? Like that
Right.
feeling of hope and
Weirdly, it's not the same as it was last year. Like the hype around everything, even Dylan Raiola, and it's like, hey, Dylan Raiola has Dana Holgorsen now. But I get it. I understand like
the
kind of
only
why
way to get
it's
that hype back is to win more ball games
right.
because you I mean look at Hugh Freeze. It's the same feeling. Like the man was unstoppable on the recruiting trail two summers ago. This summer he's really having a tough go of it because that push behind him of hope and excitement is wearing off. You got to start winning some ball games. And not saying Nebraska hasn't. I mean, they have an upward trajectory, but they just got to keep that. And, 7 wins is good, but, 9, 10 wins is going to get you to where you need to be.
Right. And so you look ahead to Nebraska's schedule. They've got home games at Michigan, USC. I'm assuming we're expecting we're going to see big recruiting weekends those for those games. And they kind of have a solid schedule. They avoid Oregon, Ohio State, and are, kind of go to Penn State. That's probably the toughest game on the
Mm-hmm.
schedule. So winning games is certainly a possibility, and I think recruiting, if that does happen, in 27 and beyond, is going to take off. But we touched on some of those 26 names as well that they win some games, they could find themselves back in the mix for. Josh, I'm really excited to work with you, man. I'm excited about this merger, about getting the gang back together. I think you, me, and I guess you work for Scout too, so you're like you have all of them. I'm like one of like a handful that have technically worked for Rivals 24/7 and On Three now at this point. And now we're back. We're all together. I work for On Three and Rivals, so we're in a very interesting position here. But excited about
Hey,
the merger,
if
Josh, and
you
appreciate
stay in
you.
it long enough, you'll work with everybody. That's the way it goes in the recruiting business.
No doubt for sure. But appreciate you making the time, man. And like I said, we're excited to have you here. We're excited to and like I said, for the fans, tune into Rivals Recruits. Make sure to check in on that. If you're a casual recruiting fan, this is a way to get like even if you're not more than a casual recruiting fan, it's the perfect way to kind of get familiar with the names at the top of the board. A lot of these 26 and 27 guys, specifically 27s, you're going to see Nebraska be mentioned for some of these guys because Nebraska's laid
Mhm.
the foundation early on for the Ahmad Hudsons and the Kennedy Browns and the Mark Matthews of the world.
Hmm. All right. Appreciate you, Tim.
Yes, sir. Of course. Appreciate you, man.